Joanne Baumgartner. We're incredibly lucky to have Joanne here. She is a graduate of this program. She did her master's in environmental studies here at San Jose State several years ago. And she was in fact here before I was hired, when I was hired 20 years ago. So she
just before.
just before. So she at that time was studying the way that old abandoned apple orchards support bird biodiversity, and she's had a whole career of looking at biodiversity. Before she came to San Jose State, she was at UC Davis, where she did soil and water science, and so she's got a real diversity of training, but probably more important, she's been fundamental in helping local organic farmers throughout California and beyond incorporate biodiversity into their farms. She's a consultant for many, many individual farmers, and she's also really a visionary, and she's influenced a lot of policy and a lot of practice in the area of bringing together farming with biodiversity conservation. So we're incredibly lucky. She's probably the most knowledgeable person on this topic that I've ever met. She's currently the executive director of the Wild Farm Alliance. The Wild Farm Alliance welcomes support from students who want to do research that supports biodiversity on farms. I know a lot of you are interested in that. They also are helpful in getting information out to decision makers about that topic, and she's written several guides for how you increase your bees, how you increase your birds, how you increase your on-farm biodiversity. So we're just incredibly lucky. Thank you so much, Joanne, for joining us today, and we can all hear about speaking up for nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, it's fun to be here after graduating from this university, and I think I want to start out by telling you that I've had this passion for nature and also for agriculture. I wanted to be a farmer ever since I was a little kid, and my husband and I were we did farm for about a dozen years, had an organic farm. But after that, I realized that I wanted to do more than that, and I started working for different nonprofits, and in 2000, I became the director of the Wild Farm Alliance. And it was an organization that came together from a funder, which is kind of a unique way of starting. The funder, Deep Ecology, was, I don't know if you know who Doug Tompkins is. He passed away a couple of years ago, and but he has bought up millions of acres in Patagonia and Chile, and conserved it for nature, and then has given that land back to the public. So he is a visionary, and his foundation at the time was funding sustainable agriculture organizations, and they were also funding nature organizations, and really felt like the two needed to talk, that they could benefit from each other. And so they pulled together a meeting where a bunch of us attended, and from that our first board emerged, and we still have a couple of people from all those years ago who are guiding us. And so while Rachel gave me a lot of kudos, I don't feel like it is just me. And in fact, I think that's a really good theme for this talk, is working together with others to get things done, because we can't do it by ourselves. We can have the idea, but until we are able to have others speak with us, we're just a lonely voice. And so let's see, what I'm going to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about what is farming with the wild, or wild farming, or how is that different from how you might imagine agriculture. Then specifically, I'm going to talk about some of our policy work that we've done, that we've been really successful on, and that we're still doing, and kind of hopefully give you a little inside track of how that works. So that's related to organic and biodiversity. It's related to food safety and biodiversity, climate change and biodiversity. And then I'm going to end with beneficial birds. I almost said insects because I'm so used to saying everybody knows beneficial insects, right? But how many of you have thought about beneficial birds? Well, we're promoting that concept and getting lots of traction, which is exciting. So first, I threw this slide in here because this is not, climate change is not our main, or we're not working directly on policy with climate change, but we are advising a really cool group in California called CalCan. If you Google that, CalCan, you'll find out what they're up to, and basically they're directing a whole bunch of climate money, the cap and trade money that's getting collected into sustainable agriculture. And as you might imagine, industrial agriculture is trying to get that money too. So it's important that there's a voice out there. So we've published this document, which you can get a lot of these things online from our website, wildfarmalliance.org. And this one is how to conserve biodiversity on the farm, actions to take on a continuum from simple to complex. And so I thought by sharing this concept with you, you get an idea of what is farming with the wild or farming for biodiversity. So a lot of farmers who say that they want to increase biodiversity are really thinking about the soil. It's not that the soil is simplistic, but it's more, it's one of the first practices that a farmer who's trying to incorporate biodiversity will talk about. And it's often a lot of the tools and concepts are often what they're used to. So it's increasing the microbial diversity, which has all kinds of benefits from healthy plants and healthy food and better fertility, better water holding capacity, to supporting those above ground organisms like predaceous ground beetles that eat all kinds of pest insects, and supporting pollinators like this ground nesting bee. So I'm moving across this continuum, getting a little more complicated as farmers actually keeping the soil covered. Like I'm in Watsonville, California, and I always shake my head when I see in the middle of the winter there's a rainstorm and so much of the land is not covered. There's so much erosion. These farmers spend a huge amount of money to build up the soil, at least the organic farmers do. And then it erodes away, so that doesn't make sense. But there's all kinds of reasons why we want to conserve this soil. And also moving through this continuum more, providing nest sites. It's a little easier thing to do for farmers than later on I talk about vegetative habitat. Putting up a bird box, pretty easy thing to do. I mean, there's a lot of components to it. Like if you put up a bird box, you have to monitor it. You don't want to bring in, you want to bring in, say, a bluebird, which eat a lot more insects near nest boxes than if there aren't nest boxes, and can help with vineyard production, for instance, but lots of different crops. And but if you're not careful, other birds could move in there that are pests, like house sparrows and or starlings, and they can cause damage to crops. So lots of people put up barn owl boxes, and I'm just going to go through this quickly. Moving through the continuum, having flowering plants, even non-native flowering plants like this dandelion is good. on the farm because it's supporting those insects that we hear are in decline. It sounds like it's a worldwide decline, and it's very troubling, because if you think about it, lots of organisms rely on insects. If not for, we rely on for pollination and pest control, but we also rely on them because all these other organisms are eating them. All those beneficial birds are eating insects, and lizards and snakes and foxes and bears and anyways, so flowers. But native plants are better. Native plants typically, not all across the board, but typically native plants are better. These organisms have evolved with native plants, like monarchs have evolved with Asclepias, and so they need that milkweed to survive. And on the East Coast, there's this really cool book called Bringing Nature Home that a professor on the East Coast, Doug Tallamy, wrote, and he talks about how an oak tree will support 500 different lepidopteran insects. So lepidopterans are caterpillars, and if you could imagine, caterpillars are bigger than a lot of insects, and it's a big high protein source for birds. So they need that to raise their young, and one of his students has done this really cool study where they looked at in urban Washington, D.C., which has actually a lot of native trees, where there's not at least 75% native cover, the chickadees won't successfully raise nestlings, so because they need that predominantly oak and other native tree habitat. But native plants support lots of native insects, and then further on the continuum, we don't just want flowers, we want structure, we want trees and shrubs, which then help support birds and bees and bats. And we want that habitat connected so that there is places for larger animals to move through, like this bobcat. And when we have those corridors through farmlands, it means that there's habitat that is close to where these beneficial organisms can provide ecosystem services. What's cool about, these are some hedgerows and windbreaks. So let me see if I can do this. What's cool about this document is I'm going to talk next about this organic biodiversity work that we've been doing, and basically we're helping the organic community address a regulation that has been in place since the beginning of the USDA organic seal came out, which about 20 years ago. I was talking to a certifier, and she was saying, well, there's a lot of farmers that just have they're just doing a little bit, and we need to show them how they can incrementally do more. And so we created this thinking about that, and some certifiers around the country have now hand this out to their organic farmers. Like CCOF, which is in our area, is the biggest certifier. I think they're the biggest certifier in the U.S., but they also are really big here in California. So I was going to show you that the National Organic Program, here's the regulations. Operators must maintain or improve natural resources, including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. Biodiversity conservation is part of the NOP definition of organic production, and in the preamble, when government writes a rule, they also write like an introduction, and in the introduction they say, well, here's what we were really thinking when we wrote this rule. And in it, that's the preamble, it says growers must initiate practices to conserve biodiversity and show compliance in their certification process. So how many of you have ever heard of any of this? Yeah, like a lot of people don't know. I mean, when you think of organic, you think, oh, it's more expensive, it's an environmental eco-label, it's probably safer for you, it's cleaner food, and yeah, it probably protects the environment, but you're not really sure how. Well, we way back in 2004 started working on this issue, and I'm not going to go through all this, but we built a whole bunch of work and partners around this effort to get the USDA to actually enforce that regulation. And in 2016, they finally published guidance on it that we wrote. So what's interesting about this whole, or which I talked about when in the beginning, that we don't do this in a vacuum. What happened was somebody came to me in the organic industry and said, hey, this regulation is here, we need to train people about it. And I said, okay, well, let's put together a committee. And it was this really broad-based national committee of the movers and shakers, and people were kind of scratching their head like, well, yeah, it's in there, well, you know, what should we do? And I brought in the people who were like, I don't know, it is a waste of time, because they are also really helpful. They give you all the arguments for why you shouldn't be doing it or what's wrong with what you're doing, especially if you respect each other. I mean, there has to be that. And so, all these years, what happened too was we went to, there's this board called the National Organic Standards Board, which is a guiding body for the USDA rule, and it meets twice a year in different places around the country. And so all the organic certifiers usually show up there, and depending on the issue, farmers show up, and we were always showing up there, so everybody gets to know us. And how this body works is that they recommend to the USDA what to do. So when the Republicans are in charge, not so much happens. But when the Democrats are in charge, they implement all of what the NOSB says or tries to. So it's not totally that way, but there is something, like right now, the National Organic Standards Board has recommended, and the USDA has actually created a whole new level of regulation around how animals should be treated humanely. Well, I mean, they sort of are already in organic, but this would be like chickens have to have a pasture. Right? They can't just be out in a dirt yard, right? And so the current administration said, whoa, this is too environmental. So we're just going to have to wait to get that through, I think. But in any case, I wanted to go back here for a little bit. So we knew that a lot of certifiers were like, what? Biodiversity? I don't even know what that means. And do you all know what that means? Yeah? Oh, good. That's awesome. Good job.
Quiz them. They don't. They'll always say yes. Right?
Yeah, okay, tell me, what does it mean? Who wants to say? Yeah.
Well, isn't biodiversity just the abundance of like the natural species that are supposed to be in place, and like that you wanna like it's not only about species, it's about ecosystems, like everything thriving together.
That's
in a connected
really
way.
good. Yeah. It's about from the microbes to the big organisms, plants and animals and in between, and the ecosystem processes that are part of it, like climate change. But when I would call some of the certifiers, like a certifier in Nevada, they were like, huh? What are you talking about? But anyways, there's about 50 organic certifiers, and we outreached to them all. We got all of their inspection forms and asked them if they wanted our help with updating their forms and making sure that they're addressing this. And but when we got their forms, we looked at how well they were doing, and basically, red is poor. I don't know if you can see that. The top one is on livestock, and the bottom is on cropland. So a few are doing really good. Then to break that down more into soil, wildlife, and water, you can see that, like in this blue over here for crop, they're trying to conserve the soil and make sure it's biodiverse, but not so much the rest of it. And so anyway, so what we did was we ended up working with a little over half of the certifiers that we pushed hard to work with the biggest ones that certified the most farmers, so that we worked with about those that are certifying 75% of the farmers to update their organic system plans. And now what we want to do is go back and see, like, okay, how good did they do? So that's what we have on our plate now. And then so some of the certifiers, like CCOF, who I mentioned, and CCOF is a really good place to get a job for some of you guys. You might want to check out what they're doing.
What does it stand for?
It stands for California Certified Organic Farmers. The reason why I didn't say that, though, is because they're trying to get away from that name, because they actually certified farmers all around the country, more so on the West Coast. But in any case, they are now doing a really good job, and so much so that not only do their forms that farmers have to fill out are good, but the inspector forms are good, and the reviewers are trained to say, oh, wait, this isn't, I mean, they still have some way to go to get all their farmers on board, but still. But so now, CCOF, I was talking to CCOF the other day, and I was like, it's too bad that all these other certifiers aren't doing as well as you, and they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, can you help us talk to the USDA about that? Sure. So, you know, we try and be respectful of all these other certifiers, and like we didn't tell everybody who's doing the worst. We did. This is part of a report. We did say tout some of the ones that are doing the best, but then we could call up the worst and say, we know where you are on this list, and it's bad. You know, in a nice way we say that, but. So, I mean, because, you know, we're all in this together, right? Like, the boat, what's that saying, like, the boat rises.
Rising tide lifts all boats.
Yes. Yeah. So through all of this, I've never gone on an organic farm that was doing terrible and you know, yelled at them or anything. I would tell them what they could do better, but we are trying to help people improve, not bum them out.